All right. Welcome to the Energy Crisis and Bitcoin panel. I think this is going to be a good one. Let's start off by having our excellent panelists introduce themselves. The four gentlemen here have a wealth of experience, not only in Bitcoin, but specifically in mining. And I'm really excited for you all to hear the insights they have. So let's start here and go down. Take a minute or two and explain to the audience who you are, what you do in the space, and why you're here on stage.
Excellent. Thanks, David. I'm Zach Bradford. I am the CEO of CleanSpark. We are a publicly traded Bitcoin miner in the U.S. I think we're about the third or fourth largest based on hash rate. We do have a focus on sustainability. Our background actually came from the energy business. And so we're currently mining about 90% carbon-free and look forward to having a good conversation.
Thanks. Good to be here. So I'm Andy Long. I'm the CEO of White Rock Management. We're a privately held, pure-play Bitcoin miner, mining in Sweden and the US. One of the largest miners out there that isn't publicly held. My background, I've been mining since 2013. Both personally and in Sweden, and seen a couple of bear markets before the current one. It's been worse than this before, so enjoy the ride. Pleased to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jelmer. I'm CEO of GreenTech Technologies. We're a computing and energy technology company. We provide sustainable solutions for optimization and balancing and the recovery of waste energy. And we're building digital infrastructure for HPC, Web3, and energy management applications. We primarily specialize in immersion solutions and integrating it with heat infrastructures. We've been mining in the Netherlands for over 5 years right now, and we're still profitable, even though the crazy energy crisis. And I think that's also why I'm here in the panel.
And my name is Daniel Condon. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Blockware Solutions. We are a vertically integrated Bitcoin mining as a service company, which means that we sell ASICs, Bitcoin mining rigs to both individual and institutional investors. We own and operate Bitcoin mining data centers in the U.S., primarily in eastern Kentucky and moving into West Virginia. We operate a pool, and we also provide miner management services for a turnkey offering to our clients. We also have a media and research arm called Blockware Intelligence. And excited for the discussion.
All right. Well, according to the screen up there, we've got to talk about the energy crisis before we talk about Bitcoin. So Jelmer and Andy, I think you guys being from Europe are going to have a bit better perspective than the three Americans on stage about what exactly is going on. So could you guys take a minute and kind of contextualize for the audience what exactly the energy crisis in Europe is, how we got here, how it's affecting your business, and how you're thinking about the future of mining in Europe as a result?
Sure. So look, there's definitely an energy crisis in Europe just now, but we're all kind of focused on the short term. We all have short memories. We were already in an energy crisis in mid-2021, and the seeds of that crisis actually go back 20, 30, even 40 years. I think even Reagan in the 80s warned about over-reliance on fossil and on gas supplies from Eastern Europe in Western Europe. So what we have in Europe just now is a kind of perfect storm in both the literal and the figurative sense. If you look back to 2021, you had a combination of weather conditions. You had cold winters. You had droughts in Latin America. You had a whole bunch of factors that meant that the supply of gas was not what it was likely to be. And then on the other side, you had an increase in demand. In the post-COVID recovery, demand for energy went up by something like 25%. Shipping costs for LNG were through the roof. And so classic economics, supply exceeds demand, price rises. And we've seen huge increases in the price of energy in Europe since 2021. And that has only been exacerbated now by the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So where we are now is that really the only affordable resources for energy for mining in Europe are in locations where the energy is, if you like, stranded. As well as producing energy, you have to transport it. When you transport energy, you have losses in the grid, but you also need to have enough capacity in the distribution network. And in a situation where there is supply constraints, gas pipelines are being turned down, nuclear power stations are being turned off, which is a terrible idea, and new renewable generation is not keeping pace, then you really have to go to places where there is already too much energy and you can't take that energy away. So there isn't a close end in sight to the energy situation just now. I think there is increasing demand for the energy that's out there. It's hard to find good locations with low stable power, but it's really a function of underinvestment for the last decades in domestic energy production and in renewable production. There are some kind of green shoots or things to be thankful for. If you look at the recent figures from Ember, I think the renewable production increase worldwide has almost exactly met the increase in energy consumption. So there is definitely investment being made. And one of the things, and I'm sure we'll go on to talk about it, that Bitcoin can do is provide stable base load for the producers to give them confidence in increasing investment in production. But the energy crisis in Europe is here and in front of us, and we can see it in the spot markets every day.
Yeah. I think I agree with almost everything you say. We've seen it happening as well. Like our customers, the greenhouse industry, they've had bills. 3 years ago, they paid 20,000 euros a month for the energy bills. Now they pay 600,000 euros a month for the energy bills. The only people still operating their business with a smile are the people that hedge themselves. We have customers that have a gas price of 18 cents. We have customers that have a gas price that is 250. There's such big differences in the market right now, and we actually see a lot of them selling their positions and just not producing food, because that's going to be more profitable than actually using the energy they pre-contractually committed to. So there are a lot of crazy things happening in the industry right now, but we believe that Bitcoin, like our solution, is actually benefiting this, because every crisis also comes with opportunities. The EU is investing 300 billion in the development of renewables over the next years. This is a crazy amount of money, but there's not really a plan for consumption. So they just think that if we build it, there will be someone that will consume it. Well, we don't necessarily believe that, but it will result in a lot more need and demand for a stable load, but also for load balancing applications. And the moment that the heat user vertically integrates with a mining farm, so it produces heat and Bitcoin at the same time, so it's basically an e-boiler that produces Bitcoin and can engage in load balancing, there is no way that an e-boiler, a generic one, will ever be cheaper. So we believe that this will actually, with the coming years, we'll see a very steep increase in Bitcoin boilers.
All right. Well, thanks for that context. I think there are probably a good number of Americans in the audience, and it's useful to hear that perspective. There are also a number of people who in America would say that we're facing an energy crisis. Perhaps not to the same degree, but President Biden has been rapidly depleting the United States' strategic reserves of oil. Gas prices are high. Could you two, the Americans on the stage, talk about what you think is going on the North American side of things?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump into that. So, in North America, the crisis that we're facing really is price-driven. It's not really the same that we're having here. But I think that there's also a crisis on the energy side from a media point of view, too. Because abundant energy is something that is something that we believe in and something that we believe Bitcoin supports. And there's really a push to conserve energy rather than produce energy. And I think that that's really what we're facing in the U.S. is this perceived lack of abundance for the first time in a very long time. And, also we're continuing to see a push for renewables, which we're big proponents of. But we have done, what the things we have done have led to intermittent renewables. So our energy crisis is more about grid stability. It's about making that abundant energy available when we need it, because we really have a mismatch going on in the U.S. right now. And that mismatch of a lot of energy being produced by the renewables during the day, but our heavy usage is in the evenings after the sun goes down. We have a lot of solar. So balancing the grid, creating a sustainable grid is really what we're facing in the U.S. And Bitcoin can affect that in a great way and in a very positive manner to consume both stranded power, as Andy mentioned, but also be that balancing effect on the grid to keep things stable. So that's a little bit of what we're facing. We operate on the east coast of the U.S. for the most part.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit there, I think maybe to compare and contrast the energy crises across the pond here a bit, where there are some commonalities and there's some key differences. And to agree, in the U.S. and North America, it is more economic. The U.S. and North America are blessed with an abundance of natural resources. That's different than Europe in many ways. So as we look at increasing the production of energy to meet the demand, right? Because fundamentally, the issue is driven by an imbalance between the supply and demand, right? And when you have a situation like there, you have supply shock, which is amplified. And in the U.S., it's really creating incentives to produce more energy. Getting this mindset that consuming energy, it's not bad, right? I mean, that's what consuming energy is what evolves societies and civilizations and enables innovation, right? And then as you compare it and contrast to Europe, it's more of a reliance on other parties and kind of a concept of, the manifestation of counterparty risk due to a lot of, negative, stuff happening geopolitically at the same time, right? In addition to an economic crisis. So, I mean, just to cut that off, I think the key, as we look at it from a domestic perspective from the U.S. and North America, is about creating incentives to produce more power, leveraging some of the resources that we have abundance of while we ramp up and create a more sustainable future.
Yeah. So dovetailing off of that, it's pretty obvious to anyone who's paid attention to the mining space or understands how Bitcoin works that mining adds a novel economic incentive to produce power. And so it seems self-evident why this might be good for grids and why this might be good for the energy-abundant future you all discussed. But could you each take a moment and maybe talk about why specifically and how specifically you believe that Bitcoin mining may lead to a stronger energy future, both for North America and for Europe?
Maybe I'll start there too. So, having a background in the energy space, we actually originally, CleanSpark was started as an energy company. So we were in the business of creating grid solutions through production and energy storage through batteries. And the reason that we made the shift we made is because ultimately change, whether it's the energy grid or anything else that happens in human society, right now, most things at large scale, they have to be driven by the markets. And we exited the energy business because you have to find somebody that will pay for what you're offering. And really found that Bitcoin is the perfect intersection. It's an industry where we are standing here raising our hands and we are saying, hey, we will both consume a large amount of energy and we will be flexible when you need us. And what that really does is it creates the incentives needed to build a generation. The biggest problem you have, and I'm going to use the example of a solar project, is you have a chicken and an egg problem. If you want to build a large solar farm, you have to make it bankable, so someone will finance it. Well, if you're going to use the energy from a solar farm, you need it to be there when you want to use it. So you can't build a business before the energy's there, and the energy can't be built before the business is there. So you have to have this intersection point. And I think what we have is Bitcoin miners We are set up in a way where we will consume in areas where there's abundant power, but we will always want to grow in a good and positive way. So if we hit the limits of what's available, that's when new generation can be added. That's where new generation can be built to support an existing business that cash flows well and that's willing to be flexible enough to allow the timelines for it to be built. So I think that that's a key point. In order for markets to drive change, somebody has to pay for it, and Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin in general is there to pay for it.
Maybe just to jump in on the back of that, because you hit some stuff that are key to our business and that we're looking at right now. And we're talking a lot about incentives. So I'm not necessarily talking about governmental incentives, subsidies, and so forth. It's more about what we've seen is you can drive this change and this transition in light of the chicken and the egg scenario by really, like if you think ESG, and there's a lot of talk about this, there's an S in there as well. All right, so you can, I like to think about it as kind of like a mutually beneficial and perpetually sustainable positive incentive loop, right? Where you have jurisdictions, I can speak to this from a U.S. perspective, Kentucky, for example, where this is old coal mining country, right? A very carbon emitting industry, right? And a lot of decline in that space. So they have power infrastructure in place. They have a lot of power that was once consumed. They have high unemployment. So they create an incentive for us, for example, to come there and make investments and provide good jobs, that pay well and have benefits and so on and so forth. That's a huge social impact, right? We consume that power that was meant to be consumed. That lowers the power rates for the constituency, right? So there's economic benefit from an incentive perspective that's provided to us. There's social and economic benefit that's provided to the community, and then that catches on. West Virginia, the state next door, sees what's going on in Kentucky. Traditionally, coal is a huge part of that state's economy. And now it's to the position where they say, if you come here, same kind of base incentive package, if you come here and pledge that you're going to create jobs, invest in the community, consume this power, lower costs, we're going to partner with you to build a 400 megawatt solar facility. So that's how you can actually take action to enact change. And it's not going to happen overnight where it's a pie in the sky, immeasurable, we're going to be renewable right now. It has to happen gradually, and you have to have a plan to be able to execute on that.
Yeah, I think Danny's right. And it's easy to underestimate, actually, the impact that Bitcoin has already had on incentivizing utilities to build out. If you go back 12 years, and remember, utilities are very conservative by nature. They have long payback times. You build a new generation station or a hydro dam or something, kind of 20, 30 years payback or longer. So, if you build it, they will come isn't really a thing. If somebody says to you, build this new solar farm in the middle of nowhere where there's no transmission. Because the transmission takes forever to build as well. It's years and years and years to get the permission. It's millions of dollars to build the lines. But suddenly there's a buyer of last resort for cheap energy globally, as long as you're not in some kind of sanctioned country or you've a situation where you feel that your physical hardware is going to be at risk. People will come to the energy. And we've seen the industry catch on to the point that utilities are getting involved in investing in mining now as well. But we can also see the kind of the pump priming effect. So in Sweden, where White Rock is, we've got 30 megawatts or more in Boden in north of Sweden. Hyver up there as well, as our Genesis. I used to be up there in 2013-14. That town is a military town, really not a lot of industry at all. We went there and built 4 megawatts back in 2014. That then caused the energy company to say, hey, maybe we should invest in a substation, which was a 135 megawatt substation, which then caused other people to come and invest and to build and to build and to build. They're now building a 2,000 megawatt green steel plant, which is going to be run from hydrogen, from hydropower. So the pump priming effect of Bitcoin as a consumer of energy 24/7 at any location that is sensible really incentivizes those utilities, because from domestic consumption, industrial consumption, it's all at the wrong time of day. Just as the sun goes down, everybody plugs their electric car in to charge it up, and the grid completely imbalances. And the point that you made as well about grid rebalancing and Bitcoin as a tool for utilities to manage their networks. We see that in Texas, we see it in Sweden, we see it in other locations as well, where miners can respond really quickly to balance the frequency on the grid or to respond to extreme weather events. And that's a good thing. It's the industry being a good kind of corporate citizen, if you like, supporting the community, helping the grid get through, snowstorms or periods of intense demand or whatever. So I think it's completely different. 12 years ago, there was nobody that could use that energy. It takes a long time to spin up an aluminium smelter or something, and there's not 1,000 people in the middle of nowhere to go and work in it. But if you've got 50 megawatts of 3-cent power somewhere random, I'll turn up, for sure.
I truly believe that heat recovery can give you an edge if you focus on the S. Because if you talk about creating jobs in local communities, the moment that you plant your immersion solution there for 3 cents and recover all the heat actually goes to a greenhouse, a brewery, any other industrial user that needs to be developed next to the site, creates a lot of additional jobs. There's also an incentive for local communities to give you that power, to give you that land. So what we're working on right now is multiple projects in Northern America where we go to the site with the energy instead of going to the heat user and attracting the heat user to us. We have a very extensive network in the horticulture, and we hear a lot of people like, hey, I want to expand to the US. Hey, I want to diversify, because in Europe right now it's it's quite risky. So we tell them, you know what? We find sites for you. We build it out. You don't have to pay for any infrastructure costs because we put in all the boiler rooms because it's our technology. You just take our heat. And the moment they use our heat, they are incentivized because it's at a discount than they would do it otherwise. We have a huge reduction in OPEX. So it's state-of-the-art facilities. The stakeholders are all benefiting from the solution, the local community, there are a lot of jobs. So we really believe that this will be the next edge. Because we also believe that data centers will be forced to go green in the future. You already hear a lot of noise in Europe about them mandatory recovery of heat. So those sites will also become very valuable. So at the end, it's an infrastructure play financed by Bitcoin.
Dovetailing off of that, I think many American Bitcoiners are worried about, for example, recent statements by the Biden administration, by climate activists, and by some politicians who are concerned about Bitcoin's energy usage and environmental impact. But to the observant Bitcoiner, it's clear that the battle lines for Bitcoin's environmental regulations are arguably in Europe, before they're in the United States. Many prominent EU politicians have talked about banning proof of work, and it seems like Brussels came fairly close to something substantive and may have backed out at the last second. But to you guys, Andy and Jelmer, what do you think about the risk of sort of EU regulation against mining? What do you think is most likely, and why do you think that whatever they end up doing is perhaps misguided?
Brussels loves to get involved, right? No, I'm not a Brexiter. You can. He's on the panel tomorrow, right? So I think, the EU loves to get involved, and I think actually their primary concern is about KYC and AML and exchanges and consumer protection. But then you also get people that get onto the internet and click and read a few reports, and then they come out and say things like, Bitcoin should move to proof of stake, right? That sentence, by definition, is said by an idiot, because it completely contradicts the definition of what Bitcoin is, right? So proof of work as being banned in Europe is not going to happen. First of all, I'm going to say that. And then they flirted with it. They spoke to industry, they did a bit of research, they understood that that doesn't make sense. In fact, they were talking about not just banning proof-of-work mining, but banning transacting in any coin that uses proof-of-work. So basically, the EU would say, hey, we'll just ban Bitcoin. Well, you can't ban Bitcoin. The genie's out of the bottle. You can't uninvent nuclear weapons. You can't uninvent Bitcoin. It's out there. People understand what it is. It can never be destroyed, and will only ever be 21 million coins. And I think the other thing that, when people think about it, the reason that we won't see a proof-of-work ban or a renewable energy mandate, whatever, in Europe is this. If you say to people that are already using abundant, spare renewable energy, say in the north of Sweden, we're going to ban what you're doing, right? We're going to tell you to turn off. Well, it's not like we're just going to turn the miners off and go home and say, no, that's a bummer. Miners will take their hardware and go elsewhere. We saw that in China. We saw it in Kazakhstan. This hardware is portable. So if you ban mining on renewable energy, all you're doing is pushing that demand down and moving it somewhere where maybe it's not going to be a renewable energy. So your amazing policy initiative has caused net carbon emission increase. So I think the politicians that think through the second and the third order implications of that get that, and they're not going to go there. And we see the same thing in the US, right? In New York State with the proposed moratorium on expansion of mining and for greenage and so on, and that legislation was passed in New York, but is still sitting in an in-tray on Governor Hochul's desk with 421 other bills, which she has to decide to sign or not by the end of December. I don't think she's going to. That's the thin end of the wedge, basically. And if you see a state saying, hey, we're going to tell you how you can use your energy, then that just sends a message, invest in another state. So that's why I don't think it will happen. So I think government is more interested in regulation of exchanges and in getting their fingers on or issuing central bank digital currencies. There's a reason why there's only one legal CBDC in China, and it's the one issued by the state, so they can see what the hell's going on, right? So, yeah, I don't think it's going to happen.
No. You make some good remarks. And I also think it's very dangerous if we're going to decide what's good consumption and what's negative consumption. I think that's a slippery slope. But for us, it's a bit different than for air-cooled miners, because we're a niche player. We developed a certain solution, and which is exactly the same as an e-boiler. So the moment you ban our solution, you ban an e-boiler. Because then this is a conversation we often have with people. They say, yeah, it's so sustainable, I'm getting an e-boiler, I'm all by electric. It's okay, but the grid's currently powered by 80% fossil fuels. Yeah, no, in the future it's going to be sustainable. It's okay, great, that's a good initiative. How about if we place a mining farm next to your site? No, that's very unsustainable. I'm like, okay, but it's the same electricity that goes through. It's exactly the same. But for some reason, it's imprinted in their mind. Mining is bad. Mining is not sustainable. Mining is e-waste. Mining is a lot of bad things. And I think it will be very difficult to get rid of this philosophy, because it's so ingrained in some of the politicians. And you have a couple of, I cannot give them the credit to call them news outlets, but let's call them blogs, that are very heavily trying to influence the mindset of politicians with flawed research. And it's, in my opinion, kind of succeeding. So I think we as an industry in Europe need to have a stronger stand to show actually what is done, how it's done, why we do what we do, and what the positive side of it is. And I think we have not done that enough yet. It's the last years, Bitcoin miners are becoming more open, more transparent. They're sharing much more. But before that, no one knew what everyone was doing. You had to know people to know, okay, he's doing X, Y, Z. So I think it's also a lot of market education that we need to do to prevent potential bans. I don't see it happening too, but you can better prevent than cure.
Yeah, and speaking of those benefits, I think it's clear from the words that you all have shared that Bitcoin mining is key to producing more energy, and in turn key to this abundant energy future that several of you discussed. One thing I'd like you guys to expand on, though, are sort of the last year or so. We've seen kind of a mounting narrative shift around mining where people are not only pointing out that miners are often using energy that would otherwise be sort of wasted or lost in transmission or curtailed, but that miners may have unique environmental benefits as well, whether that's sort of integrating with renewables, whether that's methane flaring. Zach, do you want to talk maybe a little bit, and I'll open up to you guys as well, about what some of those environmental benefits of mining may be?
Yeah, I think, again, the market-based generation is a big piece. One of the things that I think we need to do as Bitcoin miners and as the Bitcoin community is take the narrative. Right now we're talking about an energy crisis, but how Bitcoin miners can help solve that crisis, not only with the right now, but, we're creating a crisis potentially for like 2030 and 2035 in the adoption of electric vehicles. A lot of states and countries are actually mandating this. And being a proponent of, a low carbon future, we have to think about how are we going to get there. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of plans to get there. So I'm going to use this kind of niche example. And again, if we all wanted to plug in electric vehicles right now, in the U.S., we would need 30% more generation than the grid has to offer in total. And that is a lot of generation that we need to build in the next 15 years to get there. So again, if we look at that and the study, all the studies have been done about how much that can decarbonize if all the vehicles became electric, again, we would have a whole new crisis. And Bitcoin miners can solve that crisis by building the generation now. In addition to that, we can look at more subtle ways that can have an impact, such as, flare mining, where you take a distressed, or not a distressed, but a stranded oil well, it's flaring unusable gas off into the environment, incredibly harmful. We can harness that. Now, the key with doing that, though, and where we have to make sure, again, the chicken before the egg, that we're not eating the egg before it becomes a chicken, is, Bitcoin miners need to be careful, and we need to make good choices, knowing that we're under a microscope. Going to an oil well that is flaring and using that to Bitcoin mine, if that well already exists, that's a good thing. If it creates the incentive to drill the well, then it's a bad thing. So I think that there's a lot of things that make this a more complex discussion, whether it's flare gas, whether it's just the building of generation. And again, I think that we need to take over the narrative as the ones solving the energy crisis, as the ones helping create that renewable energy future. Us as a company, we're actually focused on kind of championing nuclear power, because nuclear power is something that I think is feared often. We're seeing a lot of things happen in Europe where they're turning plants back on because of energy sovereignty needs. But it's a base load. It doesn't produce carbon. And I think that one thing that is true about nuclear in general that's different maybe from some renewables is you can build renewables both small scale and large scale. Nuclear, the best way to build it is really large scale. Well, there's no better large scale consumer of power that can be done at a fairly concentrated location than Bitcoin mining. So I think that there's going to be something, to be said for that. And those are going to take, a decade to kind of prove out. But, and to kind of wrap up my thoughts, again, to the ESG narrative, having an impact on real communities, in a small community we operate in, we're not only offering jobs that were vacated by factories, but also that city has been at least partially reliant on coal. And we've made investments such that actually by the end of next year, they will be exiting their reliance on coal. And that even goes with our additional power being consumed. It allows cities to make choices to remove reliance on carbon-based sources and focus on renewable or carbon-free sources. That only happens with investments of companies like ours.
In
Danny, I have a feeling.
Yeah. No, I mean, I got some thoughts coming on the back of that. I mean, I think what's really interesting, kind of removes a trust factor in some conceptual way, is that what catalyzes this transition and Bitcoin miners, helping to get to a more sustainable future, is actually economically driven. Right? You can be motivated by your top and bottom line. You don't have to have a noble quest. Now, it's great if you are doing something, to empower the world and enact change, but you don't have to get moving here. And I think that's on the back of the concept that Bitcoin miners are scrappy. Bitcoin mining is incredibly competitive. 90+% of your, OpEx cost is power. So we're going to go to the cheapest sources of power, period. Right? And to Andy's point, we are time and location independent energy buyers of last resort.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, if you bring all these factors together, I like to kind of think about it on more of a micro and a macro level real quick. So on a micro level, we're seeing some incredibly creative and scrappy uses of, stranded energy source, natural gas that would otherwise be flared off. I saw on Twitter the other day, hydro farming in Kenya, in a really 15, 30 rigs, not a huge setup, lowering the cost of power for this community by 90%. That's economically driven, right? So if you have that as the base foundation for enabling this change, you're more likely to make this change happen, right? And as you look at it at more of a macro scale, where I think, all of us on stage are mining or facilitating mining for our clients, it goes back to that, just creating incentives. And as you talked about regulation as well, like if New York bans mining, Pennsylvania is going to scoop up those clients. That's good for Pennsylvania. New York's going to be pissed about that decision at one point, and they're going to see their carbon footprint increase, most likely as a result of that. Right? So, think about it on a small scale, incredibly scrappy use of power. On a large scale, you want to get reliable power, you want to get cheap power, you want to be in friendly geopolitical regions so you don't get rug pulled. We've seen a lot of this happen on a global basis. But just to wrap up those thoughts, it doesn't take like a very noble mindset per se to enable this. Economics are going to drive this change, and that's what's really fantastic.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin is about kind of making energy portable. You can take the economic effect of that energy. In the case of the flare gas, so we're doing that in Texas. You've got wells that were already there, taking the gas. And for those that don't know, you get this kind of gas bubbling up out of the well. And if it's uneconomic to compress that gas or to take it in a pipeline somewhere, they just put it on a pipe and light it and burn it. The problem with that is it's not 100% efficient. So you're releasing some methane into the atmosphere as well as the combustion products. And methane is way worse than CO2 for the environment. So instead you take that gas, you put it into a generator and you run your miners on it. Happy days. Those generators work really efficiently. So we're doing that. It works great. But you can have other sorts of innovation. You have the Blockstream project it probably doesn't cost in, but you take solar during the day, you put it into batteries, and then you use that solar power at night. You've got to pay for the inverters, you've got to pay for the batteries, you've got to have like 3 times the generation to support a certain amount of load, but it causes innovation. So I think Bitcoin's role as an incentive for utilities around the world to kind of get their act together and to know that there's a customer there and that energy is doing something useful, which is securing the network, is creating a global incentive to invest in energy. Because otherwise, you build this thing, and if you don't have the grid, you won't get the investment. Generation is expensive, and this is where miners have really made a massive difference in the world. And also, let's not forget, back in the day, we didn't use that much energy. 2013, 14, a 2 megawatt farm would produce the output of one S19 today. And I had one of those farms. So we have this exponential growth in diff. It's not going away. The manufacturers aren't going to stop shipping hardware. The network is going to keep getting harder and harder and more secure. So we just have to almost like rejoice in the energy usage and the incentive that mining or block production, if you want to call it something other than mining, gives to the energy producers to invest in these new renewable sources.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be very economic driven, but the moment that, like, this is how we look at it, the moment you can only control the cost price of electricity, you can buy it at 3 cents, you can buy it at 2 cents. At a certain time, you cannot buy it lower than that. That's it. You know, you reach your top. There's a certain production cost because you most often don't own the asset that generates it. If we look at large industrial heat consumers, and there are many out there that can handle 50 megawatt, 60 megawatt, district network heating, 180 megawatt, they look at this completely different. They can run a mine at a loss because the heat is cheaper than they would produce it with another asset. So once they will step in at scale, it changes the game. Because it's not about what's your cost price, it might be what's your loss. And then there's nothing you can do about it, because the moment that you have a cost to run and they have an opportunity cost, then it's a game you cannot win.
Yeah. Andy, I want to bring it back to you as we wind things down. You've been in the space for a while. You've been mining for about a decade. What does the next decade look like? You guys have been making a lot of sort of theoretical arguments, a lot of kind of concepts, but let's end this by perhaps grounding this positive energy future that's driven by Bitcoin with a hypothetical. So I know it's a hard question, but what do you think mining looks like in 10 years? And can you describe maybe the world that you envision, brought about by the sort of arguments that you guys have been making on stage?
So what does mining look like in a decade? I think we're going to see a smaller number of larger industrial scale miners. It's not to say that home mining is ever going to go away, because to your point, if you think about the output of your hardware as coin and as heat, if you're going to run resistive load to create heat anyway, then the coin is free. So home mining is great. I had a Butterfly Labs Jalapeno little thing like this. It was like 1 gigahash or something. It made 0.2 Bitcoin, right? It only cost $200. So that's always going to be there. But I think we will see consolidation in the public space, because when the tide goes out, you see who's been swimming naked, and there are miners out there who leveraged up to buy hardware who are now kind of finding it difficult to make those payments. And I think what we'll see is consolidation across the public and the private space, where people with a lot of hardware combined with people who have a lot of infrastructure. But we're not going to get to kind of like 1 or 2 big miners. That's too centralized. 10, 15 big miners, several pools, and more innovation in terms of getting close to generation sources, collaborative efforts with generators, whether it's nuclear, whether it's hydro in new geographies, and new hardware. Right, we're going to see Intel in the space shipping in 2023. We may see other new entrants come along. Bitmain has been dominant for the last 6-7 years. It's a great product, but we'll see what happens. There's always innovation coming around the corner, but the core of the protocol of Bitcoin and of proof of work is not changing. We're just going to be challenged increasingly to be more and more efficient, and to go to locations where there is renewable power that can provide those provide the energy to run those operations. So it's going to be exciting. I don't know. I don't want to make a difficulty forecast for 10 years, but the halving is coming. It's 15 months. It's not that long.
We've got a few minutes left. Zach, Jelmer, Danny, you guys want to do rapid fire closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just kind of piggyback on what Andy said. I think the future is really bright. I think we have a ton of potential. Consolidation's already happening. We've actually been a miner who's acquired 2 other facilities in the last 3 months. But it's opportunity is what it is. I think we're going to see a lot of collaboration with utilities. I've only been in this space for about 3 years now, which I guess is a while now. But when we entered, even then, utilities didn't want to talk to a Bitcoin miner. And now utilities are ready to and wanting and pursuing meetings with Bitcoin miners. They recognize what that looks like. So I think the collaboration with public utilities in those markets is going to lead to an expansion, consolidation. It's going to strengthen miners that have set themselves apart as good operators, and also very excited about what the hardware is going to look like in the future. So.
I think on the hardware level there will be a lot of innovation. I don't understand how this type of hardware got this big. So I expect that this will change a lot. And then I think the infrastructure allowing that change needs to evolve as well. So we'll see a lot of new infrastructure coming up with new type of miners, new type of firmware, a lot faster response to do more frequency balancing. In addition, we strongly believe in vertical integration. I think either heat users will start mining or miners will become heat users. They will create a greenhouse, rent it out to someone. They will create a brewery and expand business to make sure that they can offset their costs as efficient as possible.
All right. Well, Zach, Andy, Jelmer, Danny, sorry we have to cut you off there, but thank you guys so much. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Magazine Analyst Desk, hosted by BitGo. We are live at Bitcoin Amsterdam, and I'm joined by Mills to my left and Joe Hall all the way at the end. We just heard an excellent talking about Bitcoin and the energy crisis. We've been talking a lot about just energy usage going on. I'd love just initial thoughts on when you hear Bitcoin mining uses too much energy, what is your initial response?
Do research. There's just so many ways that Bitcoin mining is capturing energy that's otherwise going to be wasted. And if people do a little more research, I think they might find it's not exactly what Clownword tells them.
I mean, these tulips came from Bitcoin mining. Who would attack the humble tulip? It's not the 1600s anymore. The tulip is useful for being a beautiful flower. But in all seriousness, Bitcoin doesn't use enough energy. The way in which Bitcoin is incentivizing methane capture, like we're seeing at the moment in places like Ireland, close to home, or even with Bitcoin Brabant, the company behind these tulips, as they just kitted out a warehouse with a Bitcoin miner that heats the warehouse through solar energy, and it used to heat the warehouse with methane gas. So I don't know who can attack Bitcoin mining when you're looking at these examples play out in real life.
And also, I want to bring up, shout out to Daniel Batten, who wrote an excellent article for Bitcoin Magazine a few months ago, where he brought up, he was an ESG nut who believed exactly that Bitcoin mining uses too much energy. And in his report, he realized in the way that we use methane gas that would have otherwise just been wasted and sent off into the atmosphere, this is actually beneficial to the environment to use this. Not even just counting the fact that we use less energy than all the Christmas lights you put up for 1 month out of the year. We use less energy than all the ATMs found all over the world. And we use less energy than the real backing of the U.S. dollar, which is the U.S. military. But we're not going to talk about those things. I want to talk a little bit now about proof of work. We're seeing a renewed fight of proof of work versus proof of stake. That other shitcoin decided to finally complete their whatever thing that they did. But now the narrative is really pushing forward on proof of work being this boogeyman in the room. What are your concerns? We see a lot of conversations stateside through legislative efforts against proof of work. I'd love your thoughts, Mills, on just the domestic issues there.
I'll let you start before I talk domestic.
Sure. we heard from the panel there, the resounding message was proof of work is not changing anytime soon. And I know this isn't the analysis desk, and that other coin did that other thing that we're not going to talk about here. That's analysis right there.
Hard-hitting analysis.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But yeah, proof of work isn't changing. It's a force for good. It's a force for positive change. You brought up Daniel Batten. You know, he introduced this idea that Bitcoin, or maybe he didn't introduce it, but he definitely expounded on the idea that Bitcoin could become carbon negative. And elsewhere, you know, kind of bring up Madeira on the Madeira stage just recently. There, they're using renewable energy sources to investigate the mining of Bitcoin. So there's all sorts of positive developments going on in the Bitcoin mining space.
Yeah, we actually just previewed a little trailer on the SAT stage, so we'll be clipping this talk. I don't think this was a part of the stream, but we'll be clipping this talk, and we're doing a documentary about the conversations with the president and other government officials in Madeira. We had a few people present. I think Greg Foss will be joining after. He was also a part of explaining how Bitcoin mining, all the positive things that could happen in Madeira.
It's exciting to see. I mean, look, we see city-states like Madeira. We see states like Texas finding ways to use Bitcoin. Then we see these other states like New York or even my home state of California just make foolish policy decisions. We're watching the competition come to life in real time. Guys, be sure to like and subscribe down below. We're going to be back shortly after this next panel.